Last week we kind of talked about this idea of, okay, in chapter 1 he wept, mourned, prayed, and then he acted. Okay, he got up and did. And that action, he makes a request to the king, travels around 1,000 miles. He goes at night and inspects the wall. He makes the plan, presents the plan, gets the people on board. And then what does he do after he gets the people on board? Look at, somebody read chapter 18, or chapter 2, verse 18 for us, nice and loud.
And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work.
So they strengthen their hands, or they set their hands. Literally, the idea is that he tells them what they need to do, tells them the king's request, tells them what God told them to do, and literally the people are like, yep, let's do it. Let's get up and let's go to work. Okay? So what happens when we read passages like Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, where he says, go therefore into all nations and make disciples. Like that's what God told us to do, right? Everybody agree with that? Like that's our charge, not just the preacher's charge. Now it includes the preacher, but it includes everybody here. That's the charge he's given to all of us, to go therefore into all the world and make disciples. So when we read that and when we were convinced about that, did we get up and go? Did we, like he says here, set our hands and our feet to go? Now that could mean to our children. Did we take our children, and maybe you were an adult when you committed your life to him and you had adult children. Did you go to those children at that moment and say, listen, I need to introduce you to this man named Jesus? Do you go? Do you get up and set your hand or strengthen your hands for the work of Christ when you go to work and you talk to the person you work with about the gospel of Christ? Let me present something pretty heavy on you as we begin this morning. What if you found out that your coworker that you worked every day one day went to hell? Because you chose not to go. Ouch, right? That would hurt. That would be worse than maybe having the cure of cancer and keeping it a secret. That would be worse than having the cure to the COVID-19 and keeping it a secret. When Nehemiah presented this plan to the people, they said, yep, let's do it. And beginning in chapter 3, we have them doing it. See, there's a lot to be said about hearing and doing. And we see the idea in James, that James brings out the idea that we cannot be merely hearers of the word, but what? Doers of the word also. He compares it to a man who looks intently at his face in a mirror and then walks away and forgets what he looks like. Like, what if you brushed your teeth this morning and you got like crest dripping down your cheek and it's on down your tongue and it gets onto your collar or the neck of your sweater, and you go and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, wow, it's there, and you just walk away and leave it there? That's ridiculous. Nobody does that. But what happens is we see the crest dripping down our face, and what do? We wipe it off, and if it gets on our shirt, we change our shirt. One time I was preaching, and about halfway through my sermon, I realized that I left my fly open. Okay, I'm going to be real with you this morning. That's very embarrassing. Especially when somebody at the back of the auditorium holds up a sign that says, barn door open. And you read that sign, and you're trying to present a lesson, and you're going, is that saying what I think it says? And then the second problem is posed. How do I fix it? I didn't have a pulpit. You know, if I had a great big wood pulpit, I'd just go behind the pulpit, fix it, and move on. I didn't have a pulpit. And now I know people notice it. I could feel my face getting redder and redder. But what if I was sitting down and Amanda said, hey, your fly's open, before I got up to speak, and I chose to just leave it down anyways? That's like somebody who hears the word and doesn't do it. So these people in Nehemiah chapter 2, they hear what they have to do. Nehemiah presents this plan, and they get up and they do it. God has presented for us a plan. God has presented for us the way to bring the lost salvation. Has he not? He gave us his son. And he says, now all I want you to do is I want you to put on the whole armor of God, and I want you to go tell people about him. But our pride gets in the way, our embarrassment gets in the way. What are we to be embarrassed about? Are we embarrassed about Christ? Or our busyness? We don't have enough time in the day. Yesterday I was with the teens and we were playing Would You Rather, and I said, would you rather have more time or more money? Now, would anybody like to guess what a bunch of teenagers said? More time or more money? Anybody want to guess? Okay, that's what I thought they said too. Nope, not one of them. They all wanted more time. I was shocked by it. But what that proved to me is that people feel that they lack time. Maybe we feel like we lack time, and that's why we don't evangelize the way we should. No, maybe we're too caught up in our own selfish ambition. But what if Nehemiah would have come to the people in Jerusalem and they said, hey, okay, we're going to build this wall. We got to build this wall because X, Y, Z. We have to have protection. We're a laughingstock of all the nations. We need to reestablish God's city. And they said, no way, you're on your own, Nehemiah. The wall never would have gotten rebuilt. The temple would have never been reestablished. Jerusalem would have never been reestablished for what God intended it to be at that time. So they set their hands to the work. He says in verse 19, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, the servants of Geshem and Arab, heard of it, and they jeered at us, or they mocked us, they teased us, and despised us, and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. Verse 20 really, I think, is very applicable today. How many times have somebody come to you and said, why are you serving this God? I think of Job, right? Remember his friends kept coming to him and saying, just denounce God. His wife even came to him. Well, why are you doing this, Job? How many times have people come to us and they say, why do you waste your time on church on Sunday? You may have thought that before. You may have been extremely busy and you're going and you're having to take a couple hours out of your morning on a Sunday, the only one of 2 days you may have off during the week. And why am I wasting my time doing this? Why am I wasting my time serving this God? The world thinks that. The world thinks that. You may have been asked questions like that. Why are you taking that time out of your busy schedule to worship this God that really isn't existing? But look at the response that Nehemiah gives when they ask, why are you rebelling? Why are you doing this? What is this thing you're doing? And he replies, the God of heaven will make us prosper. Look at that and compare it to verse 18. And I told them of the hand of my God that has been upon me for good. Or look at verse 8 of chapter 2. For the good hand of my God was upon me. Do you think we could use that as our response in our everyday life? How is your family staying well? The good hand of my God is upon me. Why is your business successful? The good hand of my God is on me. How are you able to say so happy all the time in this time of craziness? The good hand of my God is on me. We can answer that way, right? Let me ask you a question. If somebody be so bold, tell me why we don't answer it that way. Do I have any courageous, bold people in here?
Maybe it's just what you said. Maybe we're not very courageous. Maybe we're afraid of, what they'll think if we give God the glory.
Do you think Nehemiah was afraid when he said that to these people who could have destroyed him? Probably. He's probably very afraid, but he had more faith in his God than being afraid of those people. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we struggle with the courage. Why else? Why else do we not answer it that way? For the good hand of my God is upon me. Gary?
It could be that this, we found out about our enemies, our opposition. First,
Right.
it was an emotional thing, you're sad, grief.
Right.
Then, by the time we get down here to 19, it developed laughter and scorn,
Yeah.
despise.
Right.
So we really need to know what our enemy's going to be doing to us while we're doing this good work.
Yeah.
Be aware. Don't shrink. Don't back down.
Absolutely.
It's coming.
Right. How many times in the New Testament are we told to be on guard? To be aware, to stay awake, Paul tells the church in Thessalonica. Right? For the good hand of my Lord is upon me. Why are you so successful as a businessman?
I think we're better at that now than we have been in the past. Maybe it's just me aging.
Wisdom.
I don't know that. It's something for me that, I don't know, just maybe maturity.
Okay.
But I think it's important even for young people who are parents to vocalize those things in front of their children.
Absolutely.
On a daily basis. Like, and instill that in them at an early age. But I do think as the church, we are better about giving God the glory for our blessings.
Yeah. And we should be. And I'm encouraged to hear that because I look at my own life and I go, I still struggle with that. I'm young and prideful, and when I do something good, it's got to be my own doing, right? And I know good and well it's not. I know that it's God. And how many times do we see that idea of, by everything we do, God should receive the glory for it?
I think the older I get, the less I really care what somebody thinks about it.
Great point.
But I know, like in Megan's day, there's that sense of I don't want to put Jesus free.
Right.
I don't
Right.
want crazy going around.
Yeah. And that is absolutely true. You get to a point in your adulthood where you go, I could care less what people think. I agree. With social media, the way it is, kids are literally, they live in a glass house. Everything they do is seen by everybody. So if they post, hey, we had a great outing with our youth group, there's going to be somebody that sees that on Monday and go, ugh, you go to church? And that kind of effect may not bother us as an adults, especially as we get older, because we care. But for a teen, that's a big idea. I think in our world we have a problem and a really hard time with self-confidence. Even as adults, there's adults that have a hard time with, and the lack of self-confidence causes also a lack in our God, or a lack in confidence in our God. So I think we need to be encouraged and be able to give God the glory when good things happen. Because, listen, if you think back over this year, there's been a lot of bad things that happen, but there's also been a lot of good things that happen. And we only focus on the squeaky wheel. That's what gets the grease. But what about saying, well, look at all the people we've reached out to via technology this year because we've had to go that route. And to God be the glory. Because the good hand of God is upon me. So we get into chapter 3 and we begin seeing, after he's presented this plan, not only do they put their hands to the work, but he shows us how they do it. Now there's a couple key phrases here before we go to the map on the screen. There's a couple key phrases here that I want us to look at. If you go to chapter 3 and verse 2, if you like to write in your Bible or if you have a little notepad, I want you to write down or mark the word next. Because you're going to see a pattern developed in this text with that word next. Look at verse 2. It says, and next to him the men of Jericho built. And next to them, and then if you go down in verse 4, and next to them, and he continues on and shows that pattern of doing something side by side. Now, we're not going to read chapter 3 in its entirety, because to be honest with you, there's a lot of names and countries of chapter 3 that I don't know how to pronounce, and it just begins to stumble. But I want to point out this pattern of what they're doing. These are a people who have been downtrodden, who have just come out of captivity for the second time. These are people who have been beaten up, looked down upon. They've had no encouragement. They've had despair, the text says. But after Nehemiah presents this plan, they begin working side by side to do what? What are they doing? They're rebuilding the wall, right? But what really are they doing? The will of God. Do you think we as a congregation can do this? Stand side by side next to each other to do the will of God? Absolutely. That's our call. Gary?
Can I read a couple scriptures spiritually?
Absolutely.
Ephesians 4:15 says, speaking the truth in love, they grow up in all things in him who is the head, Christ, in whom the whole body joined together by every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share.
Absolutely.
The growth of the body for the head binding itself and mother.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of equivalent.
Right? And you could take that in Hebrews chapter 4 and compare it to Romans chapter 12 and also 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is the reference that I had down, and the idea that the body is made up of many members. And he says, and he gives the example of the physical body, of the ears and the eyes. And he says, to which of the ears says to the eye that you have no value? But individually, we make up the body of Christ. Therefore, we are to work side by side. Just like my eyes and my ears and my sense of touch work side by side for the benefit of my body. I was watching, I don't know if you guys remember the show Nash Bridges. 1996. The only reason I ever watched it because he drove a 71 Cuda convertible with a Hemi. I mean, the car's worth probably multiple $1 million today. And he drives it around the streets of San Francisco and jumps it off the streets. And it's so unrealistic, but I guess in 1996 it was more realistic. But he had this eyewitness, and she was blind. And I don't know if you've seen the show, but Cheech Marin is also in the show, and it's a good combination. I don't know, maybe I'm a nerd for watching it, but I think it's funny because Cheech Marin says she's blind, and he's like, but her senses, because she's blind, all of her other senses have taken over, and she was able to tell basically the weight of the person based on their footsteps, because her hearing has been elevated. Let me ask you a question. Do we in the church do that? Do we really feel an impact when part of the body isn't functioning the way the body should? See, not all of us have the gift of encouragement. Not all of us have the gift of hospitality. Not all of us have the gift of knowledge or all these other gifts that we're given. Each of us have a gift. Each of us have been given a spiritual gift for the glory of God. That goes right back because the good hand of God was upon me. Just like this congregation. Do I got 2 minutes? 4 minutes? Man. I guess that's good that class seems to go by fast. I hope it seems like it's going by fast for you. But it says, and next to him the men of Jericho built. And then he continues down, and next to them, over and over. And if you go down and you mark it in your Bible, you really see this concept develop like was brought out by Gary in Hebrews chapter 4, or in Romans chapter 12, or in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, in the idea that we're to work side by side, not for our glory, but for whose glory? The glory of God. Absolutely. So if you took a snapshot of Broadway Church of Christ, the body here, and you said, are we working next to each other? Or let me ask you another question. Are we working next to other bodies of Christ for the glory of God? Or have we made ourselves an exclusive club? Or do we have so many differences within the body that we don't work side by side with each other? It's overwhelming. If you try to do everything by yourself, it's completely overwhelming. I know. I have 3 children at home, and when Amanda's gone, it's overwhelming. I need to work side by side with her to take care of my children. The body, each individual member, needs to work side by side for the glory of God. So we have this map up on the wall. And just to kind of give you a quick visual of it, they begin working on this wall of Jerusalem. And if you look over here it would be your right-hand side, there's the sheep gate. And they begin working, and he goes down through the text and talks about the sheep gate. And the sheep gate was consecrated or set as holy by the priests. That's what we see in the first couple verses. But they work counterclockwise around this gate to complete this gate up on the hill of Jerusalem. Now, if you look at this idea, it's not real small. And this is going to be designed to be a gate or a wall to protect the people within it. So it's got to be strong. It can't just be slopped together. They have to work side by side, starting here at the sheep gate, and he talks working all the way around, and you have these different people working around this gate to complete the wall of Jerusalem. So here's the question I'd like to leave us with this morning. What wall are we building? I'm not going there. I'm not talking about the wall between here and Mexico. But what wall? What thing is the church building side by side? What are we doing? What is our wall that we're building? If you have all these different people and you can read through, and I encourage you to go down this week and read Nehemiah chapter 3. Don't get hung up on the exact pronunciation of the words or the names. Just read through it and see that these people work. In fact, the only time that you see people not working side by side is in verse 5. It says, and next to them the Tekoites repaired. But, notice that word but, that contrasting word there. Their nobles would not stop to serve their Lord.
What is that?
I don't know. I don't know why. I looked up why that's there, and maybe we'll flesh it out later, but I don't know why that was included. There wasn't really any concise information that I found on why, whether it was they didn't like that or they didn't want that, or what the actual Lord was. Was it a capital L, or was it the Lord like they were servants to those people? I don't know. I can't answer that, Gary. I asked the same question when I read it. But I think, by way of application, I think it's safe to say, as we look at chapter 3, and if we compare chapter 3, or the nation of Israel, to the church today, there's going to be those that are going to be willing to work side by side for the glory of God. But there's also going to be those that won't. And that's exactly what you have here in chapter 3. But let me ask you, these people in chapter 3 and verse 5, was all of the nation discouraged by it? No, they kept working. It's easy for us to get discouraged when we find out somebody else is not working. But it didn't discourage these people. These people said, you know what? I I still maintain my portion of the wall. Do you maintain your portion of the wall? Are you fulfilling your responsibility as a member, as a child of God, in whatever wall we're building? Kayla?
I'm not just looking at that, getting in that verse, talk about their super bowl.
Right.
So the rest that's over
Right. And like I said, when you look up verse 5, it's like there's some that think that Lord there is, they don't want to serve God. Or there's some that say, well, these are the servants of the nobles and they don't want to serve their leaders, their higher people, whoever they were. And I guess it doesn't really make a difference, or he would have told us there. But any questions or comments before we close? I didn't hear the bell, but we're definitely out of time. Questions, comments? Sweet. You're dismissed. We'll pick up there next week.